Sometimes, sometimes I get to be a biologist, go out in the field and survey plants. Sometimes I have to be a real estate agent and work on acquiring properties for our open space properties. Sometimes I have to be a subject matter expert when the mayor or the city council office comes calling. Sometimes I'm an educator. Today, I get to wear my favorite hat, which is advocate. So I get to be an advocate for open spaces and talk to you all about a little bit about what the city does in our conservation and preservation efforts across what is the largest urban preserve in the United States. So LA doesn't have what we have, Chicago, New York, Dallas, Texas, all these big cities. Nobody has what the city of San Diego has. Almost 50,000 acres when you put it all together, probably even more than that if we include some of the areas outside of the city within the reservoir areas around Lake Moreno, Lake Barrett, places like that in East County. So we have a big duty to protect these open spaces. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do it, why we do it, and if any time in this conversation you have questions, this is a conversation. I've done this talk a bunch of different times for a bunch of different people. I've kind of tailored it a little bit today for the CNPS group, knowing that my plant people are here and we can get a little nerdy with plants and stuff like that and talk about some of the research that we're doing. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. There's no, this is give and take here. Okay. Can everybody see that? Is there a chance we can dim the lights in the front? Yeah, it would probably be easier to see. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. Okay. All right. That's a little better. All right. So let's I got to turn this thing on, I think. Okay.
Oh, we need the light to turn the thing.
Let's make sure I'm doing this right. Oh. I don't think I want to record.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you did move it, didn't you?
I think so. I don't know. The laser pointer was working. Oh, maybe it wasn't connected.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, yeah, I can tell you a little bit about my background. So I'm originally from Ohio, and growing up in Ohio, not in a million years did I think I would end up in Southern California. It just seemed like such a foreign place to me. But I was lucky enough to play college football, and my college played the University of San Diego twice. And I was like, in my 4 years there, and I was like, huh, like playing USD, their football field is like a golf course. And I was like, this place is amazing, right? So Round City, 1.2 million people, right? But there's still places that we can be very, very alone. And that's something that really, I think, speaks to a lot of people. And that's what our open space is here for, is to have that space for people and for animals. It's really hard. It's really hard. There are a few places in Ohio, certainly, that you can do that, but no city in Ohio has the amount of nature that the city of San Diego does. It just doesn't. There are a lot of woods. There's a big forest in where I grew up and did a lot of stomping around, but it's all second growth. Like everything there was all second growth because everything was logged and then, turned back into, second growth, a lot of maples and some small oaks and things like that. But yeah.
People like Clayton Schutte.
I'd work with Clayton Schutte, and we'll talk about some of our partners for sure. Clayton Schutte with the San Diego Canyonlands is they're been an amazing partner for us in recent years, and taking over from Eric and his staff from there. But see if I can get this to work.
I think you hit
Oh, wait.
2 arrows on the side. It was just working.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm on the right. Well, you can go to the next slide. How about that? I'll just try. Yeah. So this first part is a lot about the history of the multiple species conservation program and what it is. And this we can dive into a bunch, but you guys have probably heard of what it is to take an animal or a plant or something like that, harm, harass, hunt, pursue, kill, capture, or attempt to engage in any such conduct. So the Multiple Species Conservation Program is a program that the city initiated in 1997 with our partners at the CDFW and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the County of San Diego, City of Chula Vista, and the City of San Diego all entered into this agreement. Why do we enter into the agreement? You can go to the next slide. Well, because we got sued, essentially, is what it boils down to. And the City of San Diego is what I like to call progressive reactionary. So when we have a problem, we usually put it off until it becomes urgent or something bad, terrible happens. And then we come up with a really cool solution. Well, that really cool solution was the MSCP. The problem was the city of San Diego has the most complicated water and wastewater system of any city in North America. It just, we have all these flat mesa tops, all these canyons, and then we have one sewage treatment plant. Does anybody know where the sewage treatment plant is in San Diego? Yes, on the backside of Point Loma, which we all know, water doesn't flow up a hill and then back down a hill, right? So it congregates all by the airport, and there's a huge pump station there, the airport, that pumps it over the hill into the sewage treatment plant. But that's the lowest part of the city. That's where everything kind of collides. And to get everything there, they used all the canyons. So all these amazing canyons that we have, if you've been hiking through one, you've seen manholes all over the place, right? Those are wastewater manholes because the 1950s, 60s, whenever some of these were built, 30s, some of them were built, that was the easiest way to get sewage from the top of the mesa to the airport. What's that?
Junk.
Yeah, exactly. It was thought of as like, it's not developable, so we might as well just put a sewer pipe right down through it. Well, because it was junk land, no one developed it, there was a ton of habitat still there, you know? And the small little bird that we all know, the California gnatcatcher, utilized this land. Well, in order to impact that land, there was federal permits in 1993, I think. The gnatcatcher became endangered on the federally endangered species list, which their habitat is coastal sage scrub, which is very prevalent through all these canyons, if you know anything about the canyons. And so when the wastewater team was going in there to fix things, they were constantly having to get federal permits, and an administration would change and the federal permitting process would be different. And so it was just really, really hard for projects to get done. And because of that, they didn't get done, deferred maintenance, and was causing spill after spill after spill. And what that triggered was emergency after emergency after emergency to go in there and clean these places out. But federal permits are hard to get and they can take a long time. And so because of all this impact that we're having, EPA said, City of San Diego, you have to do better. You got to do something. And so this was the nexus of the Habitat Conservation Program in the federal state government. State is called the Natural Communities Conservation Program. And so we joined those two things together and said, hey, what if we come up with this Habitat Conservation Program for the city of San Diego? And I don't pretend to know all the ins and outs of how this thing was built. I was just graduating high school when this thing was put into place. So back in Ohio. So I had no clue. But it was the very first habitat conservation program in the entire world. So the city of San Diego was right on the cusp. Again, super progressive in that regard. What happened next was we realized that there are a lot of different species that we can protect by protecting this coastal sage scrub and protecting other places. So you can go to the next slide. There was a lot of development pressure too. And I don't want to discount that because a lot of developers found open spaces easy to develop, especially the mesa tops. They're flat and easy to get to. But they had critical habitat in a lot of places and they just got done. And again, same process. Permits were hard to get. So now that multiple species program, multiple species, MSCP came into play. And now the city, our planning department, our development services department, we get to make decisions about the 92 species that are included in our MSCP and vernal pool HCP. So if you have a project that's going to impact coastal California gnatcatchers or any of the protected oak species, things like that we have on our MSCP, there is a known mitigation for that now. So if you're a developer or the city trying to do a project, you know what that mitigation is going to be, which really makes development a little bit easier. Still very difficult because there's not a ton of places to do it, but it does make it a little bit easier.
The next two are endangered species.
They're not all endangered. Some of them are threatened, some of them are rare, and we also have the Canada goose on there. The Canada goose, well, you laugh and may think like, oh, you go to the Midwest and growing up in Ohio, they're vermin. They're everywhere. People are trying to keep them away with swans and ducks and falcons and all kinds of stuff. But here, we know that geese need water. They need grasses to graze on, things like that. So preserving those areas, adding the Canada goose to that, made people think twice about developing open ponds, areas next to like grasslands next to a pond that could be very, very valuable habitat to those geese. And we don't see a ton of them here. You'll see some at Lake Murray here and there, some migrating through, but I think it's always special when I hear a goose flying overhead because yeah, a ton of them out there. But yeah, so there's a lot of different species that are included that are not rare or threatened or endangered, but they have some kind of nexus, some kind of special nexus that the people when they were building the plan said, that species should go in there because of this reason. And again, I don't pretend to know all the rhyme and reason for all that, but so what it did, that MSCP is it set of values and of conserving core biological areas. We can go to the next slide. So a core biological area, but I'll talk about that in a second. So our permit is actually for 50 years. So in 2047, our permit is over. And we also, in 2017, initiated the Vernal Pool Habitat Conservation Program, again, because we got sued. This time by the Sierra Club and a few other people for not protecting vernal pool habitat as much as we should. And it caused a huge development problem in the city of San Diego. For about 10 years, there was no development that approved fairy shrimp impacts or vernal pool impacts. So there's 7 different species in our vernal pool HCP, 5 plants and 2 animals. And we included that, and that's a subset of the vernal pool or the MSCP. So I'll talk about them. When I talk about MSCP in a whole, it includes the vernal pool HCP and those 92 species. The 7 extras are from the vernal pool HCP. But it required us to preserve, go to the next slide here, let's see what. So these are the organizations that are all kind of have been part of this. Not everybody is signed on. So right now it's just the County of San Diego, Western San Diego County, City of Chula Vista, and the City of San Diego. Santee and Poway, I think, are in process. I think Santee is in the process of getting their own HCP right now. And I think Poway is too with the Western San Diego County. Yeah, they have theirs. Okay. So a few other agencies and municipalities have kind of joined in on this, and they see what a good value it is to have this, to have a program like this, habitat conservation program. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this is the core biological areas and linkages I was talking about. So everything in teal it's been identified as a core biological area. And a lot of this is, could be from, maybe there, you see, Otay Mountain and the San Ysidro or Tijuana River Valley, Point Loma is on there, Los Pen, a bunch of different core biological areas. But you see what they're linked together with is all these orange areas. And those are a lot of the rivers and streams in San Diego. And those are the linkages, those corridors that allow plants and animals to move between those core biological areas. And if you live in an urban area, you know that these linkages are the key to habitat management because everything comes from upstream. We're on the coast. So a lot of things are coming from upstream. So if you're not managing upstream area, you're going to deal with it downstream eventually. That's for sure. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a little bit about our preserve system in general. It's about 51,000 acres. And if you see that kind of that tan and the dark, everything in the dark is what we call a multiple habitat planning area. And that's where the MSCP is valid, essentially. It doesn't include military lands, and doesn't include state lands like the state preserves and stuff like that, but it does include a lot of private lands and public lands, that are owned by the city of San Diego. Lot of different things in there, and what you see, so one of my favorite analogies is to look at like the size of some of these national parks, right? Bryce Canyon, Mesa Verde, places like that. Very similar in size, but what those national parks don't have that we have is we are completely surrounded by development on hundreds and hundreds of miles of wildland urban interface. All those urban canyons, even Mission Trails, even though the fact that it's 9,000 acres is surrounded by development, almost three sides. The north side is Miramar, but those national parks have one unit or maybe 2 or 3 units or something like that. But a lot of times they're surrounded by national forests or lower developments, stuff like that. So they don't have the challenge, some of the challenge, they have different challenges, of course. They don't have the challenges of urban management like we do. And with that comes with 178 trailheads. That number is growing daily. I think we're up to 250 some odd miles of trails. We're actually thinking about building a loop trail in Black Mountain that you could potentially camp on 16 miles without, really crossing the road. That's in our vision. But so there are places here, again, in the middle of the city, this beautiful city that we live in, 1.2 million people, where you can go out and be alone and be in nature and really be immersed. Go to the next slide. Here is some great news. So as part of our plan, we've been tasked to conserve 52,700 and some odd acres of 57,520 acres have been conserved so far out of 52,727 acres that we're required to preserve. So this just came recently. So California Department of Fish and Wildlife has this really cool tracking called the Habit Track. And it was down for a couple of years where we would kind of add habitat or add parcels to our habitat, our preserve and stuff like that. And it'd been down for a couple of years. So we were probably like 2,000 acres deficient. And then a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from our principal planner at the city planning department. He's like, hey, great news. We're only 200 acres away from our conservation goal for preservation, And I was like, how'd this happen overnight? Do we acquire a big land? He's like, no, we just adjusted the boundary to include a lot of these places that we hadn't in the past either. So when they drew these boundaries, it was 96, 95, and the technology wasn't where it was now. So there's a lot of mapping errors. You see like the preserve area, like some places, like it's way off and like it's preserving houses and it's not preserving the open space, or places where it's like it's preserving open space and there's a huge gap between the houses and the next open space. So they made a lot of corrections and a lot of this area came into the city. And so we're really only a couple hundred acres away from our goal, which, we have till 2047 to reach that goal. But the sooner we can reach it, the better, because we can just build on that. And that's something that we'll continue to do.
With the River Park Foundation, they're obtaining a lot of acreage. Is that counted or is that?
That is, if it's in the city and they acquire it, we'll count it. They acquire a lot of lands up in the headwaters, which is kind of in the county area. But they are, again, one of the River Park Foundation is one of our most vital partners in the stuff and the work that we do. Literally, we couldn't do some of the things that we do without them. They pick up tons and tons of trash every week, and they help with the homeless, unsheltered counts in the valley, and They do restoration, and they're just amazing partners. Which is, one of the things that, I like to talk about is we couldn't do it without the partners that we have. The federal agencies, the nonprofits, groups like CNPS, San Diego Zoo, Wildlife Alliance, like the Natural History Museum. Like we try to partner with everybody we can because our budget is not where we would like it to be and our staffing is not where we'd like it to be. So we had to find unique solutions for some of this stuff.
The Doge attitude are impacting funding for?
Where we found Doge, that kind of, government, waste or whatever they call it, really is in grants. And it's kind of cut the granting stream off for some of those projects. But a lot of the grants we're working on right now are grants from state agencies like SANDAG and CDFW. So we haven't been as affected with those types of things as we have at some of our partners, like the other Parks and Rec departments like that manage community parks and stuff like that. They have a lot of federal grant money. They got $8 million to build Beyer Park, and that some of that money is in threat right now. So that'll be a big hit to community if that's lost. But so far, we've been managing such a shoestring budget for my whole career there that we're kind of used to it. We kind of just go with the flow and move as we need to. Go to the next slide. So these next 4 slides or 5 slides are the species that are covered. We can kind of just roll through them. If you have a question, we can kind of go back to them. But you see, not everything. We have federal species of concern. We have narrow endemics, state threatened, all kinds of different things. Birds on the state watch list. There's some birds and some animals that aren't on here because we didn't know in 1997 they were data deficient. So we don't have a lot of butterflies. So Harbison's dun skipper, Kino checker spot butterfly, vital Prochus bumblebee. None of those were included in our plan because 1997, we just didn't know enough about them to really include them. One bird that what also is not on there is the osprey. If anybody seen the bird atlas from 1990, osprey didn't exist in San Diego County in 1990. Now you go to Mission Bay and they're everywhere and they are pooping. They're having problems because they have a nest right over top of the rec center in Santa Clara where the male is depositing his poo on the tennis court. And it gives the community park staff there a lot of headaches when they're cleaning that stuff up. Yeah, go ahead, question. Yeah, 1990, we didn't have any nesting osprey. They came from Baja, believe it or not. A lot of them, and I was talking to a colleague from LA, and they're just starting to see these birds establish themselves in Los Angeles County now in 2025. But prior to that, they didn't really have any nesting ospreys either. So we're seeing a lot of birds that were coming from north and they would just skip right over Southern California, go to Baja. And now we have a nesting pair that's been unbelievably successful around Mission Bay. I think they've had 9 chicks in the last 2 years. And yeah, there's one at Lake Murray. There are a bunch of different places and they all seem to nest in really inappropriate places. But my thoughts are to build some artificial nesting boxes for them. And, the Jackie and Shadow, the 2 eagles that are up in Big Bear, we could have our own Jackie and Shadow here in our osprey and put up a webcam for them. And so I'm working with the San Diego Bird Alliance to try to figure out some of that out and what that might look like in the future, but pretty excited about it. It's one of those things where, we didn't have them before. They're here now. Let's manage them, adaptive management, we call it.
So, from the Pacific Northwest.
A lot of them, yeah. That's where
But they skipped us. And
yeah,
they were endangered up there.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
they've come back.
They've come back big time. And now the whole habitat with them is, we won't get too far into them, but like they have their babies in January and February, and the parents are gone in June. By the time those babies are ready to fledge, and they're fledged for about 2 weeks, the parents say, see ya. And they go back down to Cabo and enjoy their life down in the Gulf of California. And then they've come back, the same pair has come back last 4 or 5 years in Mission Bay that at least I can tell. One of them's got a band on him. so I can see that one. But so there is a way to do it. It is very onerous. And so haven't had a lot of projects that have impacted osprey or some of the other species. Some of the other species that are not on the list, like the butterflies, actually the city of Santee has included the butterflies in their HCP, and we've been able to sign on to their HCP in the future to get coverage for butterflies in the city. So that was a kind of a workaround rather than amending. It's called a major amendment process. And anytime you're doing a major amendment, you have that word in there, it's onerous. Yeah. But it's something that's going to happen probably with the vernal pool HCP as spadefoot frogs get listed. That's something, or maybe even burrowing owls might get added into that vernal pool HCP. But major amendments are a lot of work for the planning department. So they haven't seen a lot of push to get there yet. Probably it'll take us to get sued again. Well, that's a good question. So if the plan's working, why are things going to get listed? Because the area outside the plan, mostly. So a lot of the species that are inside the plan are still dealing with threats from, development, invasive plants, human influences, all kinds of stuff. So we're still trying to manage those things as much as we can. But some birds and plants that they just aren't thriving. And it's the matter of, we can put $1 million into it and we just don't know why they're not taking, not thriving as much. A lot of it has to do with the climate change, So we're seeing some plants that just don't have the resiliency built into them to handle year and year after drought after drought after drought. And then you get a big dump of rain one year and then another years of drought and drought and drought. So there's all kinds of threats. So we haven't been able to take any of our plants or animals off our MSCP list. They'll stay on until the last, but hopefully in the future, we'll see some of these come off the federally or state endangered list. And then they'll still be on our list to conserve, but hopefully that will change in the future. Yeah.
Question about plants that are in the boundaries of the city of San Diego, but they're not officially in an open space. Like 2 days ago, I was on a parcel in the 4S Ranch Business Park of all places that is actually, the land use is as an open space or preserve. Finger mode, and there's San Diego barrel cactus, a number of them there. So I'm just wondering what the status of that would be, and are there ways to make sure that those instances are protected?
That's a hard question, because if it's on private land, the city doesn't really have, if it's already developed and it's private land, the city doesn't have much of a reach there. But if it's undeveloped land within our preserve, within the MHPA area, there are provisions for San Diego barrel cactus to make sure that those are salvaged before development, or development has to be pushed in an area away from them.
So if I called the city planning department, they should be able to tell me what the status of that property is.
I'm going to tell you how to do it yourself. And that's a great segue. I mean, an amazing segue. Couldn't have asked for a better one. So, yes, it is. So we have landscape design manual and environmentally sensitive land code and stuff like that. So if you're a private developer and you own land in the MHPA, say you own 100 acres, the code says you can only develop 25 of those 100 acres, and they have to be on the least environmentally sensitive area of that land. So that other 75 acres you develop, you either have to manage it in perpetuity yourself, or what oftentimes happens is those developers give that land to the city for us to manage. And it happens all the time. We own lots of parcels that and we're acquiring them all the time from developers, because the developer built his little, home section over here. And then the other 50 acres of his property, developers are not in the land management practice. So they would rather write a check, here you go, and be done with it and walk away. And a lot of times that check funds an endowment for us. So we acquire the land from them, And if it's a wetland or sometimes special uplands, they're required to give us an endowment check that will fully fund the management of those areas in perpetuity. Well, hopefully in perpetuity. It earns about 4 to 5% interest, a special fund that we have. And then, so say it's $350,000 they give us, that 4 or 5% is about equivalent to $15,000, which is defrays the cost of management for us. So we can hire a contractor, we can pay our own staff, we can use a ranger staff or whoever to manage some of these parcels with that money. And so that's a way we kind of use development code to help preserve these areas, and then focus development, again, outside of the preserve. So if you have an impact inside the preserve, if you restore inside the preserve, you get a little bit of a benefit. If you have an impact inside the preserve and you do mitigation outside the preserve, you get a little bit of a ding. So you have a higher mitigation ratio. So it's a way for us to use these development codes to focus conservation inside the preserve area, those core biological areas and the linkages that connect them. But one of your question was very well timed. So this is just a couple of snapshots of some web pages that are in the city. So Biodiverse-SD, it's a great pun. I wish I came up with it. I did not. But a city planning department has this Biodiverse-SD website, and this has all of the previous year's management and monitoring or management reports for the MSCP. It has really, you can go to the next slide here. So go to city planning's website and you'll find a link to this. Is the MHPA interactive map. And so this map is, it's not interactive here, but you can see, you can zoom into your neighborhood and you can see what lands have been conserved, if they've already been conserved, if they're scheduled to be conserved, or what. So, you know, some of them are, 100% conserved, like there can be no development on this property ever. We call that dedicated parkland. Sometimes it's designated. Designated parkland means it takes a 75% vote of the city of San Diego for them to overturn that designation rule, which we know probably will never happen. Getting 75% of people to agree on the color blue is impossible. So, but you can go to the next slide too. So this slide and the next slide are really cool maps where you can go and look at these the areas that are conserved for vernal pools, and you can see where all the vernal pools are. This isn't a greatly detailed map, but this is that road down the middle. The bottom third is the Highway 905 and brown fields over there on the east side. And you see some of these conserved areas. One of these areas, my maps or my thing's not, I'll point to it right here. So right here is, we call that Cal Terraces South. And it was a developed area. It had vernal pools on it before, and it just kind of went to the birds essentially, or not to the birds, but to people using their dirt bikes and off-road trucks and stuff like that, building ramps. And if you looked at this place 30 years ago, it would just look like a desert wasteland and nothing was growing there, tire tracks and ruts all over the place. Well, for mitigation for Highway 905, California Department of Fish and Wildlife and US Fish and Wildlife required mitigation for some of those impacts to vernal pools. And so a lot of money was put into these preserves. If you go out to this place today, it would look kind of deserty, big kind of open, kind of mud puddle, old dried up puddles, lots of cactus, lots of stuff. But if you go in there springtime, you can go to the next slide. It looks like this. Bright verdant green, duckweeds, rushes. We have Otay mesa mint down there. We have spreading Navarisha. We have some of these really highly endangered plants that live in this area that was once just a dirt bike playground. And now you go there, there's 9 threatened or endangered species that are there right now that you can go out, and including all 7 of our vernal pool conservation program species, which is really cool to see. It gives me chills to kind of go out there sometimes, because it's like, this is what we can do if we just give nature a second chance, right? We can do great things and we can make these beautiful places and manage them correctly. And it takes a lot of work, of course. I'm not, there was a lot of money pumped into these places, a lot of money. And for a good reason, to make them nice. Unfortunately, that preserve is actually closed to the public, and as are a lot of our vernal pool preserves, because of the sensitivity of both the plant species and just the ground that you're walking on. Because a vernal pool is formed because it has a layer of clay or bedrock or something like that underneath the heart of the soil, so the water can't percolate through it. If you looked at a picture of San Diego from 1935, with our first aerial photos, San Diego looks like a golf ball. It really, it's dimpled. Every flat area looks like dimples on a golf ball. And those are all vernal pools. And the species that live there are some of the most resilient species on the planet. But what's happened now is they just don't have anywhere else to go. Their habitat has been so restricted because every mesa top has been developed. Kearney Mesa, Mira Mesa, Claremont Mesa, Otay Mesa. These are all flat lands that are really good to develop on. And the vernal pool species really took a hit because of that. And so again, being the progressive reactionaries that the city is, we said, we're going to come up with a plan to preserve these species, hence our vernal pool conservation program. Again, the very first vernal pool conservation program of its kind in the world. So again, being very progressive about that. You can go to the next slide. So what does this all look like when we're managing? So how do we manage and how do we monitor these open spaces? So if you know anything about open space management, there's no one size fits all cure for this. It has to be adaptive. And you can see here, we have 11 different ranger districts now. At one point, there was only 9 when I started. So we have 11 different ranger districts. They all have different resources that they protect. They all have different rangers that work in there, and they all have different focuses, but they all protect the same, all work on the same document, the MSCP, off of that, and habitat guidelines for the environmental or endangered sensitive land areas. So we're gonna go through, I have a little highlight for each one that I pulled up. And I can talk about a little bit of what that adaptive management is, and then we'll kind of go into some of the monitoring for that. So you go to the next slide. So Balboa Park, and I wish these were a little more legible for all you guys. It's a little hard to read myself, but so Balboa Park, you wouldn't think of Balboa Park as having a lot of habitat in it, but if you've been down the Florida Canyon, you know that's not true. There's gnatcatchers all over Florida Canyon, and that's something that our ranger staff in Balboa Park really takes pride in. You know, the fact that we have nature right in the middle of the crown jewel of the city. There's beautiful nature right to be had right there. So they spend a lot of time removing unsheltered encampments, trash, things like that, managing native and non-native plants. The shoreline parks and beaches, you know, they do a lot with our areas out Dog Beach. So anybody that has been to OB Dog Beach recently saw that we put up a new fence out there. And that fence is to protect the rare and endangered plants that live right there in Smiley Lagoon. Yeah. Yep.
Probably not trying to educate some things.
Yeah.
Are you gonna close that off at some point?
That is a very good point. Yes, that is something that's in our sights right now. I can't say exactly when that's going to happen, but it's certainly going to happen. And we have great partners again. The San Diego Bird Alliance and the San Diego River Park Foundation have worked with us on this grant to do a lot of the rerouting some trails away from the sensitive plants, putting up those, you know, the sand fencing to keep people focused on the trails there and not wandering away. But eventually that area is going to be, we're going to have a really clear definition of where Dog Beach ends and where the Southern Wildlife Preserve begins. Because if you look at planning documents from Mission Bay back in the early 90s, there is a designation of that as the Southern Wildlife Preserve. Essentially just go straight from the lifeguard station down to the river, and that's the Southern Wildlife Preserve. In 1997, that was extended all the way to the ocean with the creation of the MHPA. And so then we just went through this exercise the other day. We actually looked, the dog beach in OB was actually dedicated in 1972 as a dog beach. Really progressive again for the city. You know, there was a lot of dog beach areas at that point. So we've put up kind of mapped in the new preliminary EIR that's coming out for Mission Bay Park Improvement Plan. You'll see some really interesting stuff. So if you get a chance, that's going to go out for public comment, take a look at it. So the South Shores and San Diego River area is going to be listed on there. And so there's some spaces in there that have been reserved for least turn nesting colony in the clover leaf that goes around in West Mission Bay Drive and Ingram Drive. Least turns have never nested there in the 30 years since the plan was written. So we're removing that designation and moving it to the San Diego River. And by doing that, it gives us the nexus to kind of protect that area a little bit more, which probably will be a seasonal closure more than a permanent closure at first, and then we'll kind of work our way into that more permanent closure. But putting up fences in an active riverway is really a difficult task. Even the small fence that we put up there, we had to get approval from the Corps of Engineers, our city engineers, all kinds of people. So it wasn't easy to do, but we did it, and we're preserving now coastal woolly heads, Acmaspon prostratus, and Chlorpyron maritimum, the salt marsh bird's beak are out there in pretty big numbers. Mission Bay Ranger District, they do of course, they do a lot with our lease turns and some of our rare plants as well. Yeah, question. That does include Presidio and Pioneer Park. Yeah. So we have an agreement with the state parks to kind of lease Presidio in that area too. Yeah. You can go to the next slide. So Black Mountain Ranger District, Choyas, and so Black Mountain Ranger District, another partner we worked with up there is the Friends of Los Penasquitos Lagoon. And if anybody knows Mike Kelly from that group, he's been an amazing partner for years and years with us. He found, we've been monitoring threadleaf brodea up there, and he found a population that wasn't mapped. And so we started looking at it, and next thing you know, he's out there and he's got flags in the ground. We came out there and there are 100 more flags in the ground than we had expected to see. So that population doubled almost overnight because of the dedication of some of these volunteers who work there. And so we've instituted a big project controlling in non-native grasses and things like that. And out there there was 12-foot tall black mustard in some of this area. It's right by Sun Devil Way in the can't remember what the high school is there. I think their mascot's the Sun Devils. But even in urban parks like Choyas Lake, you wouldn't think of that as being a really, mecca for wildlife, but they have a lot of cactus patches, cactus and cholla there, that has become a really great home for coastal cactus wrens. And cactus wrens have a very specific habitat needs for the size and type and area of cactus that they inhabit. And they're non-migratory, so they stick around all year long. But if they want to expand, a lot of times the youngsters will stay with the parents for many years, even helping raise next year's chicks. But those chicks won't leave until they can see another patch of cactus. And so one of our adaptive management strategies there is to build these hopscotch areas, bringing birds to cactus patches where they would be appropriate. So in Emerald Hills or places like that, where we have the necessary cactus for them to nest in, but they can't see it from where they're at now. So we're trying to create these corridors of patchwork of cactus along, and I'm not gonna say I'm an expert in cactus wrens. We have folks at the U.S. Geological Survey that survey cactus wrens on our property for us, but they tell us this, and I say, we could put into cactus. So cactus is a great way to kind of build these little hopscotch islands for them to move into the next places.
At that theater, Circle, Circle, Dot, Dot, Kathleen Haroff did a play that was called Renegades with a W.
Okay.
It was about protecting cactus wrens.
Oh, very cool.
Destruction of habitat and the quest to find a new cactus.
Nice.
It was very good.
We did a peanut project for the US Navy up that way. Actually, we were surprised how the quality of the habitat here and there was
Yeah.
pretty good still.
Yeah,
The only bummer is there's full of Argentine ants.
yeah, yeah, that's a problem. So you see, there's a very distinct theme when I talk about our adaptive management and stuff, because I have a staff of 4 people now. I have 2 biologists, a GIS analyst, and an intern. And so we're a very small staff. Of course, we rely on our park rangers enormously. There are boots on the ground land managers. But when we're talking about permitting projects, high level projects, theoretical stuff, there's only a few of us to go around. So we rely really heavily on partners, which is what we'll talk about. So our citywide open space and canyons ranger district kind of deals with all of our urban canyons. And a lot of these kind of like what we call, they're not really orphan sites, but they're like, you know, canyons that don't really fit into one of the other ranger districts really well or something like that. But they've worked on Dennery Canyon collect with the San Diego Zoo, collecting seeds for endangered San Diego button celery, which is a vernal pool obligate plant. And we collected, you know how much, like I think like 4,000 or 5,000 seeds or something like that, and it only weighed like 2 grams. So the seeds are very small, and it's very tedious because we're only collecting 10% of the seeds from any one particular plant too. So they have to visit a lot of plants to get 32,000 seeds or 3,200 seeds. So that's a big effort. But this is in Dennery Canyon actually, which is just, if you know where the Sesame Street kind of water park is, just to the southwest of that a little ways. There's a mesa there with really cool vernal pools that had been kind of degraded over the years with invasive grasses and things like that. And so we wanted to try to preserve, and then we got a good rain year, and we decided, hey, there's a bunch of button celery out here. We can make use of this. So the zoo collects those plants, those seeds. They will take them up to their propagation area, sort them, seal them, and kind of hold on to them for us, store them until we have the next vernal pool project that we need to do. Then we can ask for those seeds back in Dennery Canyon. So we're about to acquire another 90 acres from the Caltrans in Dennery Canyon that has vernal pools on it. And there's some that we just found out too that have not been restored. So we'll use those seeds that are right there from that genetic subpopulation to kind of preserve and then use to restore those vernal pools up there. So that's really exciting. Go to the next slide. Los Pen. Oh man, I'm going to go through all these kind of quick. Some I don't want to run over. So I see some of our willowy monardella folks here too. It's a great, cool perennial plant, kind of really associated with streams and kind of stream terraces. In Lopez Canyon, our public utilities department had a project in there to clear out a bunch of non-native. And as they were doing that, they're also finding some willowy monardellas that were in there. So we worked with them to tag each individual plant, GPS it, and now we play geocaching every year with those plants and try to find them again because they are really good at hiding. You wouldn't think that a plant would be very good at hiding, especially a perennial plant that stays in the same spot. But if you haven't visited it for a year, it's hard to remember exactly where it is. So, and sometimes they don't express themselves until late in the season. You know, June, July, sometimes we see them flowering. But that project, again, worked with our own, the Friends of Los Penasquitos has helped tag our plants out there. Our partners at the Public Utilities Department and their contractors really did a great job of removing a lot of weeds to help manage those areas. Mission Trails is another whole beast. It's the largest preserve in our system, bordering on almost 9,000 acres now, maybe even close to 9,500 acres when we're all said and done with it. One of the cool projects out there that's ongoing still is San Diego thorn mint habitat restoration. So there's a couple places, if anybody knows San Diego thorn mint, Acanthomintha licifolia. It is a very sensitive plant, really has a very specific soil type that it likes. These really friable clay soils that if you were walk on it right now, your boots would sink 10 inches into the soil because it's almost like, and when it gets wet, it's like fluffy mousse almost. So managing it is really difficult, but there's a lot of weeds that really love that loose, friable soil too. So just a few years ago, the population in there was down to about 10 plants. And those 10 plants we had were babied, and they had a cage around them and a cage around that cage. And we were counting each specific plant. And because we had learned the previous year that if you plant them or seed them and don't protect them, the bunnies just came in and mowed them all down. And we're just like, oh no. But this project has been immensely successful with money from Sandag and their granting program. So now this population has gone from a low of like, I think 10 or 16 to now it's over 1,400 individual plants and growing. And so we've taken that success and kind of rolled it into other places in Mission Trails where we haven't seen thorn mint in 25, 30 years, but the soils are right. And so we know that our process works. And so what we're going to do there is work with the Mission Trails Park Foundation, again, another partner that we work with, to kind of preserve these areas and put in new plants and really baby them until they're, kind of get to a point where they're self-sustaining. So that's really exciting. And that's ongoing. You can actually see that work really easy from the west side of Tierra Santa. If you go in the west side of the park, there's a really nice kind of fenced off area. Brandon, what's that trail called? I can't remember.
So just the Claremont Mesa trailhead.
Yeah.
And then you had
Kind of due east and kind of uphill a little ways. You'll see a big split rail fence there. You kind of go along, but you don't go past it. That's because you'll sink into the soil back there. But a lot of effort has gone in there. Hand pulling weeds, hands and knees, people out there hand pulling weeds. We also hands and knees counting plants, when they're little and putting flags on new recruits and things like that. So we know not to, trample them or spray them when they're itty bitty. Our botanist, Sarah, can identify a thorn mint plant when it's an inch tall. And I'm like, that's beyond me. I can't do that, but she's really, really good. So in Otay Valley Regional Park, with tons of really cool projects they have going on there, but one that's really kind of a real testament to urban biology is there's a field behind the Home Depot on Saturn Boulevard that was part of an active rec, was going to be an active rec development. They're going to put soccer fields, I think, there at some point. So our senior ranger down there, Mika, probably 7 or 8 years ago, was just mowing the grass there to keep the weeds down, and we scared some burrowing owls. And sure enough, now there's 2 active nests down there, and there are those birds have been chick machines. They've been pumping out chicks. And so one of the things that we're doing there is actively managing that habitat now for them. We're putting up signs. This is, again, a really big challenge because right next to that area is, there's a lot of folks that hang out behind the Home Depot. And then there's a trailer park there that they have feral cats that kind of coming out into the open space. The birds are pretty good at staying away, but we do see some depredation every once in a while. But that area will never be developed for active rec at this point because the cost of mitigating occupied burrowing owl habitat is higher than you would possibly believe. It's really, really difficult. And then to mitigate it, you have to bring owls to that new land and make them stay there as occupied habitat, which if you know anything about birds is they can fly. They can go anything, they can go anywhere they want. And we can't tell them to stay here, so really, really hard to mitigate for. So this is an area that we've now kind of shifted from an active rec to a more managed kind of natural resource there. Go to the next slide, please. Again, the San Diego River Park is one of the kind of an undocumented resource in the city. The San Diego River Park Foundation obviously does a lot of work there. Until just recently, we only had 1 ranger for the whole river. And she was busy. So now she's got a couple hands, but one of the things that they do is trash removal. And if anybody had seen about 8 months ago, there was a huge unsheltered encampment under the I-5 bridge. And the city had always been told that's Caltrans land. You can't go on there and manage it. You can't do anything. But everybody's like, there's so much to do there, right? There's people that need to be connected to resources. There is trash there that needs to be removed. And it's critical habitat for a lot of our the Ridgeways rail, all kinds of seabirds and things like that use those areas. And so finally, our environmental services division worked out a granting program with the state, and they got money from the state to manage this area. And they removed, 200 tons of material. It was just an unbelievable effort that ranger staff, and I think we still have ranger staff that go patrol this area on the daily basis, but it was all completely denuded of vegetation. But if you go back and look at it now, the Spartina is growing back in there. Cattails are starting to show up here and there. Other wetland plants, our salt marsh plants are starting to show up there. So it really just belies the fact that, like, if we give it nature have a chance, especially in some of these wetland areas, it'll come back. We start managing it. Our ranger staff there really does a great job managing the invasive species and trying to keep people out of that area. It's not a good place for people to be. It's a place for nature. And then the Tri-Canyons Ranger District, this is a classic example of critical infrastructure and critical habitat. So if anybody's been to Tecolote Park recently, you notice that there's a major project going on through Tecolote. There's a trunk sewer going in, and that trunk sewer is a huge sewer that collects all the wastewater from canyons to the east, from all the mesas on the east and the west, runs right through Tecolote Canyon, right through the bottom, and had major issues. 2017, there was a huge spill. 2015, there was a big sewage spill. And so as part of that, the Public Utilities Department decided that it's time to redo this pipe. How do we redo it? And they tried to do it in the most environmentally sensitive way they could by taking what they call slip lining and putting new pipes inside of the old pipe. And so it's a lot less impactful than having to dig up a big trench, remove all the old pipe and put in the new pipe. It's still a pretty impactful process, but this is what happens when you have critical infrastructure. There's no way to get around the fact that sewer pipe has to be there, but we can do it in a way that's more environmentally sensitive. Do I agree with the way it was done all the way? Off the record, no. On the record, they checked all the boxes. But what the ranger staff has done there in previous years to this, and this is why it really kind of hurt when this happened, is they've taken a lot of places there. So Tecolote Canyon, if anybody was here in the 70s, was again a dumping ground. There was like piles of concrete and asphalt all in the bottom of the canyon right behind the nature center there. And it was becoming an issue. Like, we couldn't move it out of there. It had been so entrenched in there, it was just impossible to move. So our rangers decided, what's a great way, what grows on really fast draining soil, things like that. They're like, wonder if some of these desert adapted species like cactus would grow there. So put in some soil, put it on the top, and now we have this amazingly successful restoration area that's really cactus. It's really maritime succulent scrub. There's a couple different species of cactus that are there, a lot of sage scrub species, things like that, really taken off. So that's really exciting to see. And they have about 12 different phases there. So if you're ever down there, go down to Gardenia Street in Tecolote and walk up Gardenia. They removed about 2 acres of ice plant that was like 6 feet thick. It was unbelievable cover of ice plant. So much so when you walked on it, it would be like a sponge. Really felt weird. All that's removed. One of the most successful projects I've looked at in the recent years. They planted about 500 plants a couple years ago with the help of Wild Coast, another one of our partners. out there. They got a grant. And so they're on phase 12 of restoration in Tecolote Canyon. So that's really exciting to see what they're doing out there. So if you get a chance, go check that out. Let's go to the next slide. So this is where we'll get a little nerdy and talk about our monitoring plans and monitoring reports. You can go to the next slide. So in 2021, we instituted this data dashboard, and it's really a way for us to collect. We moved away from collecting data on paper sheets. And now we don't have GPS units, we don't have paper sheets. We just go out and monitor with our phones now, because everybody's phone now has this satellite capabilities, GPS located in it, and we use field maps. That is Esri product. And so we monitor with that, and then it allows us to digitize all that data into what we see on the next slide. And so this is just for one of the occurrences. This is that occurrence in Mission Trails of San Diego thorn mint that I was talking about. So on the left-hand side, you can see we have all the different species that we maintain. And then underneath that is all the different occurrences of those species. And then to that bar graph in there, it starts at 2014 and goes up to 2024. And that's the number of plants that have been located in that area. So we can see trends over time. There's a couple tabs on there too, on the bottom for rainfall, native plant cover, and I think the other one is threats that have been monitored at the site. So this gives us, and where this is most powerful is to show to people that aren't maybe not the most, plant savvy, right? But they can see trends and they can see graphs and make it visual for them. Question?
Are these data available public? Or
this data is not a public-facing website, but if you go to San Diego Management and Monitoring Program, SDMMP, all that data is available on their website. So we collect all this data for us internally, and actually, this is part of our monitoring program was built in 1990s to monitor for rare plants. So some of these populations have data going back to the early 90s, where people were collecting data for them. And actually, the region-wide monitoring program that SDMMP initiated, called the IMG, that was actually based on the city of San Diego's protocols. So when we instituted that region-wide, the city of San Diego didn't have to change anything. We just kept doing what we were doing, which was really cool, really easy for us. But it also spoke of the forward thinking that a lot of those people had prior to the MSCP even being enacted. So we knew that we needed to monitor these plants and knew we needed to understand what was going on with them. So this is a lot of the data that kind of comes out of that monitoring, where we set up a 10-meter circle, 10 meters on either side. We'll count all the plants in that circle. And then so for this site, the circle is right here in this little area right here, right there. And then all the other plants are kind of those ancillary populations that have grown over years and been populated over years. This is 2024 data that we collected. 2025 hasn't been quite published yet. But yeah, so this is where you can really dive into some of this stuff and really get real good answers about trends, what kind of things are up next. Let's go to the next slide. This is kind of more of that information. This is from, that previous one was from 2014. This is 2024, I think. No. What year is that? 2023. So 2023 wasn't quite as good of a year for us, but you can see how that changes, and you can scroll and click the numbers over time and you'll see that'll change. Let's go to the next slide here. So again, this is some of the adaptive management I talk about is really important because of all this development that we have. So these amazing open spaces, but you see a road going through it, or you see a commercial development, or you see a residential development, or you see, homes off there in the hills that have, brush management zones and things like that they need to maintain. So you can go to the next slide. Some of the species that we protect, some of we talked about the coastal California gnatcatcher, the cactus wren up there in the top right is a burrowing owl. Bottom left is kind of hard to see because he blends in with the habitat really well. That's a coastal San Diego a horned lizard. That little guy in the middle is a spadefoot frog. We have a biologist in the city who has been corrected me a million times about saying spadefoot toad. It's not technically a toad. He's like, they're more closely related to frogs, so call them frogs if you're gonna call them anything. Okay. But these little guys are really vernal pool dependent a lot of times because they really, when they're young, they obviously grow up in the vernal pools. They'll eat fairy shrimp. They'll eat each other sometimes. The big ones will start eating the little ones, which is kind of weird. But as the pool dries out, these big cracks and furrows form in the clay. And they can sometimes go down 2 or 3 feet into the soil. And that's a really important refuge for these small froglets or toadlets because they can go down in the soil where 2 feet down, it's nice and cool and moist. They can stay down there. And then later on in the season, when it gets dry, that soil will close up. They'll perform a little magic trick and put a little mucus bubble around themselves and hide into the soil until the next time it rains. Same with the fairy shrimp. I talk about fairy shrimp as being this super resilient little animal. Like there's been studies where they've taken the cyst. So a fairy shrimp lays an egg, and then that egg is covered in like a protein coating on the outside and calls it a cyst. It can exist in soil for, right now, we don't know how long, probably forever. They've taken fairy shrimp eggs to space, exposed them to the pure vacuum of space, exposed them to gamma radiation, all kinds of stuff, bring them back to the lab and on Earth, put a couple drops of water in them, fairy shrimp show up. There's an ongoing study right now where they're living in a bell jar in a vacuum for 50 years, and they'll take some out every year to see if they're still viable. And sure enough, every year they've hatched. So these animals are unbelievably resilient if we give them the space to thrive. And that's what our preserve does, is really preserve these areas where these plants and animals have nowhere place to live. And so that's one of the things that I think is really special about what we do here in the city of San Diego is we have a direct connection to some of these plants and animals that, one, live nowhere else on the planet. We have the most biodiverse county. I'll start again. We have the most biodiverse city in the most biodiverse county in one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, here in the city of San Diego, where we're living right now. And that is something to hang our hats on. Like I said, we have the largest urban preserve. We have so much biodiversity. That's why we preserve these areas. So if I leave anything with you, with anything tonight, just know how special our preserves are and how hard our staff works to preserve these areas and doing all kinds of projects. I couldn't even list, I started going through and trying to list the projects ranger district by ranger district, and it was just too difficult. There's just so much stuff that's going on. It's really hard for us to be I just thank the Lord we have so many amazing staffers that work for us and partners that work with us that we can get some of this stuff done. Because it was just me and my 2 biologists, we'd be really just focusing on the rarest of the rare and trying to preserve those. But our breadth of our work now is just all the way up from the San Diego Safari Park in Escondido, all the way to the border of Mexico. So we have a very large swath of land that we manage.
How is it coming, trying to rehome the homeless? Because it's not just the trash, it's fire.
Oh, yeah. So Otay Regional Park has dealt with 180, 150 fires per year in Otay Valley Regional Park. Most of them started by unsheltered folks. It's a really big challenge. It is and it's a pretty unique challenge to urban ecology. Yellowstone doesn't have to deal with, folks, maybe the odd squatter here and there in a tent, but it's a really big challenge because it's not a habitat fix. It's not something I can do with a habitat to fix it. It's social, it is mental health, substance abuse, all these things are all intertwined. So we work really closely with our environmental services department to help get these people, the folks out of the preserve and find them better places to live and provide them resources. But it's an ongoing challenge.
Ton of trash coming out of Texas Street. down
Sure.
there.
Yep. Yep, and there's folks at the River Park Foundation that are cleaning up a lot of those canyons. But it's hard to stay up on it, really is. I think we can go to the next slide. I think I'm about wrapped up here. Again, more plants to talk about. We run out of time. We have some more time? We'll talk. Okay. So the bottom left-hand corner is Dudleya brevifolia, shortleaf Dudleya. Again, a very charismatic plant, in my opinion. Most of the year, you don't even know it's there. It's either dormant underground or its leaves look just like the pebbles that surround it. And you can see that's our botanist, Sarah. That's her hand. And that's one of the biggest Dudleyas we've ever seen. And that's about the size of her hand. But the flowers are about the size of a dime. But about 90% of that plant's population is here in San Diego County. And it's only San Diego County. I think there's a few plants that live down in Baja, if I'm not incorrect. And then the one down there in the middle is coast wallflower, which may or may not be a new species. John Redmond from the Natural History Museum thinks it is. So this, again, belays the fact that why it's so important to preserve these areas, because had we not preserved Crest Canyon, this whole species or new species may have been completely lost to us. But Crest Canyon's been preserved for a number of years now, and that plant is going through a whole study to see if it's related to other wallflowers, which is in the Ericium genus, which is the mustard plants. And then top right is Otay tar plant, which was really, really denuded from a lot of these areas, but we're seeing a really big resurgence of it coming back in a lot of places. And it's been a focal point of a lot of our restoration areas down in Otay Mesa. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I think I'm about wrapped up here. Yeah. So I want to say thank you guys so much for listening to me talk and helping spread the word and the passion that I have for open spaces and conservation and here in the city of San Diego. And again, if I leave you with anything, just know that you live in a special, special place. One of the most amazing places in the entire world, and we get to call it home. And it's not because of the beaches, and it's not because of the tacos. It's because of the open space that we have that makes really, in my mind, that makes San Diego really, really special. Thank you.
So I live north of your whole map area. I live in Encinitas. I'm living in Vista now. Are there organizations that are supporting management efforts up there? I see so much invasive species and all the waterways, and it's just painful. So
Yeah, there are. I'm not super familiar with everybody that does work up there, but the San Alejo Lagoon Conservancy does a lot of work. The Nature Collective, yeah, I think they changed. Yeah, there you go. So there's Vulcan Mountain, yeah. So there are a lot of places you can reach out to, and you know, if you can't reach out to somebody directly in your area or city, you know, if it's unincorporated, the San Diego County does a really good job. So the county areas, yeah.
like the city of Vista might have something.
They might. A lot of these smaller cities they don't have enough. The city of Carlsbad, I know, does. I work with them pretty regularly. City Oceanside as well. They have some open spaces, but again, they're not at the same level we're at because they just don't have the lands, you know. Yeah.
Mark, there's another question over here.
Yeah.
With things like the rare plant monitoring thing, is there any concern of like people poaching or using that data? Because I know in like
Yeah.
iNaturalist, you have like obscure data.
So a lot of the really sensitive stuff, the data gets masked. So you can see like numbers and things like that, but the actual locations of the plants a lot of times will be masked. And we do that for a number of species, not just all the rare and endangered ones, but some narrow endemics and stuff like that too. Yeah, so That's a good question because it is a really big issue. You know, Dudleyas especially are really prone to being poached. And white sage is another one. I think white sage is one of the biggest poached plants now in Southern California. So if you, yeah, exactly. Yeah, go to City Farmers and get yourself a plant and put it in your side yard.
Big, duffel bag.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
I was wondering if your department or the city of San Diego somewhere has a specific objective anywhere to create animal corridor, contiguous animal corridors. I live in the Tri-Canyons and there's like so many near misses. And what occurred to me is it looks like, you know, for generations we've lived with eminent domain to put freeways.
Yeah.
Like return someday for habitat.
Oh, I would like to see that happen. Yeah. We have made some gains on that. So the Linda Claremont Mesa Community Plan is up for is just out right now. And so I've been commenting on that. We have some trails that we want to eventually build under Balboa and Genesee and create those kind of that connection. Because again, it's so close to being, you're exactly right. It's so close to being fully connected, but some wildlife undercrossings or stuff like that is something that I'm kind of pushing for as you know, multi-use. Like the wildlife agencies don't really like us using trails for wildlife corridors, but the wildlife don't know that. So if we create a trail, like the deer are going to use it, the bobcats are going to use it, you know, just at different times when people are using it probably. So that's where somewhere where we have projects where doing wildlife monitoring with cameras to see in certain corridors that we're seeing a lot of animals moving back and forth. Maybe we can kind of do that with Balboa and Genesee here in the near future. But yeah.
Yeah, I have an area that I want to show you on the map. It's just west of the Performing Arts Middle School.
Yeah.
And it goes from the Marion Bear Trail and curves around and goes all the way to Genesee. It's like a linear park almost, but it's not.
On the east side of Genesee.
It's yes, east of Genesee.
Mm-hmm.
It crosses Conrad and Claremont Mesa Boulevard. And it just keeps on going. It's under power lines. And
Yeah.
I notice a lot of times there's just weeds and stuff there, but I think that's a really great spot for native plants.
That's an SDG&E corridor, if I'm correct. I think they have an easement underneath it. So that's going to eventually be a city trail that goes, because at the terminus of that, I think, is a city neighborhood park. And then if you go south from there, I think you might be able to connect. We can talk later. I can talk more about that specific area now. But
Actually get close to looping back to the Chateau Drive or the community center parks. The top of the very top of Tecolote.
yeah. Yeah.
Another question over here.
Are there any active initiatives to get your department more funding that people like us could help with, advocate for?
Active initiatives. Well, I go to the city council and beg. That's about as active as it gets right now. But we do have a lot of partners that have come to bat for us in previous years. And actually, in 2025, we were able to get 12 new staff members added to our department. But we weren't able to fill all of those positions because in December we made a concession to say we wouldn't hire anybody until January of 2025, and then in December of 2024 the mayor said no more hiring, and so we were able to get one person in under that deadline, a pesticide applicator that really focuses on rare plant areas, which was really highly needed for us. And that person doesn't just spray weeds, they also do integrated pest management. So it's not just all herbicide. But so we actually had a good thing going. And then in 2026, some of those positions that had not been filled were actually removed from the budget altogether because of the budget cuts. And we actually had to, it was a situation I was telling some folks earlier, was a really, you know, like that terrible Sophie's choice where it's like, you keep this position and then someone loses their job. So they cut the vacant positions, which I can't argue with. But we did get a GIS analyst, which is something our department hasn't had for 10 plus years. That we got to move to another department. And then I'm currently in the process of interviewing a biologist right now. So we'll hopefully hire a new biologist by the end of the month, which is really exciting for us. A 33% increase in our output, as I like to say. So I'm excited about that. Any other questions?
Anybody else?
Okay.
You mentioned that the open space and MSCP boundaries often don't really match up with reality. Do you want us to tell you when we find instances of that, or you already?
I would
know
say we
most-
probably know about most of them, just because I work on the mapping program pretty much daily, and I'll just be like, a great example of this is Tecolote Canyon is going through the Claremont Mesa community plan update. So in that community plan update, they were able to add 80 acres to our preserve just by adjusting the maps correctly. So, and that's just one community plan. So we look at other community plans as they're getting as they're getting updated, you know, the next time, that's where some more of this land is going to come through by those map corrections. We call them boundary line adjustments. And it's a whole process we do with the wildlife agencies to adjust, you know, we don't want preserved land over top of people's built houses, right? This doesn't make any sense. So, but great example is that Tecolote plan where we gained almost 80 acres of new preserved land. We were already managing as a preserve, but it just wasn't mapped right. So
Yeah, I was just looking at the boundaries of Rose Canyon, and you've got a bunch of houses
yeah,
within your open space.
yeah, yeah. And hopefully that will get corrected out the next time they update that plan, that community plan. But if not, if the community plan for whatever reason doesn't get updated by the time our permit's over in 2047, that's going to be a big process. Probably the 5 years prior to that, my guess is they'll push it off until the very last minute. But a lot of that stuff will be corrected out here in the near future, hopefully. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Absolutely. See any species. So we have a really cool, so if you're on iNaturalist, go on there. There's a city research program. One of the projects you can join is city open space parks. So join that project. If you join that project, we can see everything that you post in our open space. And that has been unbelievably helpful when we're writing our natural resource management plans. We've added species, we've seen species, and we're like, we didn't know we had that there. Let's go out and take a look at it and see. And so community science has revolutionized the way we look at our open space and how we use data. Before it would be like, somebody would email you a picture of a fox and be like, I got a mountain lion in my backyard or something, you know, and you're like, all right. And like, but now that data is coming to us and it's fully vetted. All right, you know, so folks are looking at it like, oh, they see a willowy monardella and they take a picture of it and they identify it as something else. Well, John Redmond from the Natural History Museum is going to go in there and correct you and tell you actually it's this species. And so that's a way that we can add to our species list in those areas and really make a good plan to kind of preserve them if need be. It's the city parks and rec open space, I think. That's it. Yeah. Oh, you're on it? I think so, yeah. Yeah. City of San Diego parks and natural spaces, natural areas. There's a couple of different projects that you can join, but we've seen almost 500,000 observances since we initiated a couple of years ago. Some of them are pretty common species that you see every day, but some of them are species that we don't see every day, which is really cool to allow the community to kind of be that scientist now. That we have thousands and thousands of eyes and ears and phones and cameras out there now, which is really, really cool.
Very good. Citizen scientist is the fellow that found the reservoir that he visually, figured out how to pay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep. Getting people involved is key.
So you said something about a goal for 2047. I have something that's a little bit more sooner than that. What is the city's plan for 30 by 30?
Well, that's a good question. So 30 by 30 as a state project that hopes to conserve 30% of the open space by 2030. What we found when working with them is the way they classify land is not the same way that our land is classified. So it's not a matter of there are huge swaths of the city that are 100% conserved that have not been recorded in 30 by 30 yet. And I think most of Mission Trails, like 8,000 acres of Mission Trails isn't listed on that 30 by 30 as conserved land, even though it's 100% conserved. So we're working with their GIS folks and our GIS folks. It's a big work pill, but they have the way they identify them as these gap codes, like 1 through 5. And it's a designation that U.S. Geological Survey has put on lands. But the way that we recorded land didn't always record those gap codes correctly. So we see a lot of land where they're on the 30 by 30 website that's not conserved in the city, but it is actually conserved. So we're working with them to kind of get that. So in the next couple of years, we'll have all of our lands kind of added by 30 by 30. But we continue to acquire land. Like we're buying land, in Mission Trails and East Elliott Preserve, north of the 52, that was going to slated to be a development for a long time. And there's a lot of private parcels that are owned up there. And so we're reaching out to homeowners that are landowners now that are like second, third generation landowners where their grandparents or their great grandparents own this property. They don't even live in San Diego anymore. They own 7 acres in Mission Trails and they're like, I'm just paying taxes on this right now. So we give them an opportunity through what we call a habitat acquisition fund. So some developers can offset their mitigation requirements by paying into this fund. And then we use that money to buy new land. And we use state grants to do it as well. So we're continuing to build and build and build. And the more we can buy land, we have, I think, probably close to about 350 acres that we're in the process of acquiring right now through a number of different ways, through Sandag and Caltrans, other developers that have going to cede the land to us once their development project is over, that kind of stuff. So we're going to continue to acquire land. And if you know somebody that has open space contiguous to, or land contiguous to our open space, talk to me because we'll try to buy it.
Spring Canyon. is the guy that's got a couple of tenders.
Oh, I know him well. Yeah.
Think that land will ever be acquired?
Not when he owns it. He is not like us. But God told him that he needs to build a homeless shelter there for 30,000 people is what he told me. Yeah. So he's not dealing in reality right now, but but he has violated a number of city codes by putting up fences and walls and things like that. And it's an ongoing process, let's put it that way, involving multiple city departments.
All right, any other questions for Mark?
I'll be here for a little bit later too, if you want to touch base.
All right,
but
thank you
guys
very
so
much. I forgot one other important announcement.
Oh.
You can just give it to Jess. So I forgot to mention next month's meeting. Next month in November, the meeting is going to be on Friday, November 21st. It will not be here. It will be at the Wild Animal Park. If you are a chapter member, you get first dibs. So we are going to have a special event up there with the